Welcome to Irish Passport.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Irish Passport.
I'm Tim McInerney.
I'm Naomi O'Leary.
We're friends.
Okay, well to Naomi.
Anwar Fad Tim. This is your passport to Irish culture, history and politics. I'm recording.
One,
two,
three. Okay. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Irish Passport podcast, where it's a very special one today, Naomi, because you won a prize.
Yes.
You won a big prize, actually.
I won a journalism prize. Yes, thank you, Tim.
Tell us, for those of us who aren't up to speed with the journalism prize scene, what did you win and for what?
So myself and two colleagues at the Irish Times were awarded the Mary Raftery Prize for Journalism. So it's an award in Ireland that recognises journalism on social issues. So the story that we won it for was this expose and investigation that I led, which was into a landlord in Ireland and how he treats his tenants. And we particularly focused on the case of a tenant who was evicted because he objected to CCTV cameras that were recording inside his property. So that was the nuts and bolts of the story, but I guess the bigger picture is that it showed how people are vulnerable to exploitation in the current situation of the housing market in Ireland, which is so severe with prices so high and such a shortage, and how unscrupulous operators are able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, right. And this is a really crazy story. So listeners in Ireland might have caught wind of this, or listeners further afield, because it just keeps getting crazier and crazier. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is somebody who was installing closed-circuit television footage cameras in people's houses and then issuing them with eviction notices if they complained about it, and somehow getting away with things like this. Well, I mean, that's just one of these mad things that these people or this body, as we'll see, did. Now, the person in question, his name is Marc Godart. This is the guy in charge of all this. Now, landlords aren't usually famous in Ireland. It's not like a name that everyone would know usually if you're a landlord. But this guy is. Everyone knows this man's name now, largely because of your reporting. Can you tell us, how has he become so famous?
Okay, so you're right. Landlords aren't usually famous in Ireland. But this particular one began to come to public notice because of disputes with tenants and because of evictions. He first appeared, I think, in an RTE primetime investigation, which was about overcrowding in housing during the pandemic. And, some reporters got access to properties where you could see, bunk beds stacked 3 high, so triple layer bunk beds, and you might have 6 of those beds per room kind of thing. And the idea was that people were renting a particular bunk, so not a room, but just a bunk. And prices for that would be something like, let's say, €350, something like that a month, and with payments asked for in cash. So it was kind of, underbelly of the Irish housing scene, I guess. And then that it didn't stop there. So the next sort of big story involving this particular landlord was it was broken by a reporter in my newspaper, the Irish Times, Olivia Kelly, and she discovered that tenants had been evicted from this apartment block, a certain apartment block called Reuben House, and then they discovered, immediately afterwards, they'd seen their own rooms go up on Airbnb for rent. So they'd been told, I think, that the building was being sold, but then it was just put on Airbnb, and they could see because they recognized their own rooms. The problem was this is they hadn't been evicted under. It would mean that they hadn't been evicted legally, basically, because you can't. You're not allowed to kick people out in order to put something onto short-term letting, and also because the landlord didn't have planning permission to do that. Like many cities and countries, Ireland has tried to put in place some rules to avoid Airbnb inflating rental prices locally, and one of those things is that you need planning permission to rent out properties on Airbnb, and in this case they didn't have it. So it was kind of, this story came out at a time when people were worried about the influence of Airbnb, and I suppose it became like, it got a lot of attention because it seemed to encapsulate this case of like, this shouldn't be allowed. People shouldn't be able to be kicked out of their house and their rooms put on Airbnb. So it kind of started from there, and my newspaper started asking questions about, you know, like, who is this guy? What's the story that we keep hearing from angry tenants? There's loads of disputes with tenants. Like, can we find out, like, who is this person? Where's his money coming from? What's he doing?
Okay, and this is actually where you got involved, because this is all happening in Dublin, of course. But you're the Irish Times European correspondent. You're the Europe correspondent. So normally you wouldn't be on the beat for stories like this. But it turns out that it actually wound its way in a strange journey to Luxembourg.
Yeah, it's actually a European story. So when you look into companies' records of the companies that Marc Godart is named as a director of, so these are the companies that would be named on documents to do with property purchases and rentals and so on, or issues in court or in the Residential Tenancies Board, which is where tenants take disputes. The name that was always being used was Green Label Properties. So you can look up Green Label Properties and other companies with similar names and company house records. And there you'll find names of directors. They're supposed to put annual accounts. There's certain documents that companies have to file. And also addresses. So companies have to be registered to certain addresses. So we started looking into this, and what we found is that there wasn't just one company, there wasn't just Green Label. There was like dozens of them, with Marc Godart listed either as director or secretary, and then these other Godarts, Renee Godart and Denise, sometimes called Denise Godart or Denise Wester or Denise Godart Wester. They were named all these company roles kind of interchangeably. And the addresses on the companies, they would often list each other. So some of the companies would be registered to Reuben House, which was that building that got evicted, got cleared of tenants. But ultimately, the addresses led back to Luxembourg. So the addresses belonging to the owning companies, so like the companies at the top of the chain, I suppose, kept going back to these addresses in Luxembourg. So my news desk got in touch with me and they were like, listen, can you go to Luxembourg and like knock on some of these doors of these addresses and try and find out what's going on here? So I hopped on a plane and turned up in Luxembourg and just started walking around and trying to find out what the story was.
Okay, right. So maybe for our listeners outside Europe, we might explain just the geopolitical context here of Luxembourg, because it's an odd country. It's very small. It's maybe like the size of a county in Ireland. Maybe that's a good comparison.
It is,
and it really only has like one city, one big city, which is Luxembourg City, right? Mm-hmm. And this place that you were traveling to, this is on the outskirts of that city, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
But there's two things that make it quite infamous, I suppose. So it's surrounded by borders. It's surrounded by several borders to several different countries, or 3 or 4 different countries: France, the Benelux countries, and Germany. And also it has a reputation for, similar to Ireland's, for being a bit of a tax haven. So can you tell us, about like coming to Luxembourg and what is the landscape around you in terms of people like this who might have companies like that?
Yeah, so the presence of Luxembourg in the company accounts definitely sort of raised a few eyebrows. So we were all asking, like, is there some sort of tax dodge going on here just because of the reputation of Luxembourg? So it was part of the reason why, we wanted to find out more. So I landed down there and started walking around these residential streets. It's all super calm, super tidy. Like, it's very, very like, it's suburbia kind of. The places where the addresses were, there was actually a number of them. I can't even remember how many doors I knocked on. It might have been, I don't know, 10, 6, something like that. There were many addresses. They were all, most of them, like normal houses. They looked like places where people would live, like family homes. A couple of them, one of them was just a building site. So I don't know what had happened there. And another one, like, you know, like just I couldn't find the door. It didn't seem to correspond to like the actual door of a property. But the picture I started to build up was, I started to get the picture of this massive housing boom that had happened in Luxembourg, because you could see, if you looked up these places on Google Maps, they showed like green fields. They wouldn't have been updated, but then when you actually arrive, it's unrecognizable. It's all of this new building. It's mostly taking place in the area of Alsingen, which is this quite rich, like, commuter suburb of Luxembourg City. So massive development. And also, I was on the lookout for post boxes that had company names. So the typical company name, like how you have limited or something in English. In Luxembourg, it's Sarl or Sci, so SARL or SCI. I was looking for company names Sarl and Sci on letterboxes, and they were everywhere. So it wasn't limited to just the companies I was looking for. It was like every residential home seemed to have loads of companies registered to it. I was like, that's strange. And the kind of background to this is that Luxembourg has been named specifically in, particularly in Germany, as like the location for funds that have been funneled out of the country by massive rental operations that are, for tax purposes, getting sent into Luxembourg. From what we could find out, that's not the model of what's going on here with the Godart thing. From what I could see, it seems to be it's a much smaller scale, but it looks like, or, you know, it would make sense as something which is set up for the interest of keeping wealth in a family. So traditionally, families in Luxembourg have often used company structures to get advantageous, like to get advantages in inheritance tax, basically. There isn't inheritance tax on direct line succession in Luxembourg. So if something just goes to the kids, there shouldn't be inheritance tax on it, but it's a little bit complicated and there's exemptions and stuff like that. But in the past, it's basically been advantageous, and you don't even need to declare necessarily if it's like the ownership of shares moving from one family member to another. So it looked to me that this is completely prevalent in Luxembourg, because, like I was saying, like every residential house seemed to have these little companies on the letterbox, as well as like people's names. So it was really intriguing. So I spent a few days just traveling all around Luxembourg and knocking on doors and speaking to the people, whoever I found there. And the most commonly seen address in the company records turned out to be this very ordinary cottage-looking house on a residential street in like a part of Alsingen, which used to be quite a farming area, but now is increasingly built up. So the green fields all around it have turned into like blocks of apartments, basically. And that's where I found René Godart, so the guy who was named as director in so many companies, and it turned out to be Marc Godart's father.
Enchanté.
Enchanté.
Je suis ici à Luxembourg pour savoir plus de votre investissement en Irlande.
Right, so this is the scene that you describe in one of the articles. So you just walked down the street, and Marc Godart's father was in the front garden sweeping the path. Is that it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you just walked up to him and said hi. Was he friendly?
I kind of recognized him because I'd managed to find pictures of him by looking through like old magazine records, and he's a kind of well-known guy in the town. So he was in like a business society, and there was a picture of him. And he was actually quite friendly at first. So I was like, "Hi, René Godart," and like walked up to him, and I was like, "Do you have a sec?" And then I explained that I was a journalist from Ireland, and quite quickly he was like, no. He started like retreating back into his house.
Okay, no, I'm not interested.
No.
He
kind of gave the impression like, oh, I'm just a little old man, you know, I don't know anything about this, like you need to ask my son. And he retreated back into his garage, and he wouldn't answer any questions. I was particularly trying to press him on payments. The Godart operation had been ordered to pay tenants compensation or money back for a number of things to do with evictions, and they just hadn't paid. And the tenants were just like, well, we won our case, but we just don't have any money. So I was pressing them on like, were they going to pay it, you know? He just retreated back in and he wouldn't answer any questions.
You ask my son, he's in Ireland, not me.
Yes, but you and your wife are named
Yes.
as directors and owners of Hesper SA,
Yes.
which
yes,
is the
yes,
owner
yes.
of his company. So,
Yes, and you come from Ireland, you told me that it's crazy.
that's right. Well, it happens that there's
Yes,
a number
I know
of
what
rulings
happened,
by the
but-
Residential Tenancy Board in favour of his
Yes, I
tenants.
know all. You ask my son, he knows everything. I know not everything what happens there.
Mm.
I subsequently found out, because my reporting didn't stop there, that René Godart almost certainly knows exactly what I was talking about, because he was very much involved in the day-to-day running of this property empire. Like, one former employee who I spoke to said that René was like his direct manager. So, you know, he's definitely involved.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Let's take a moment actually to look at this family before we go any further. So
Yeah.
Marc Godart got involved in all this when he was quite young, right? Just
Yeah.
after the financial crash. But he also had finance from this family, right? So you discovered that there is money in the family that was kind of used to finance a lot of this business in the first place. His one detail that I'd like to know more about, if you know more about, is that his mother was famous in Luxembourg for
Well-
being on reality TV.
Well, I'll tell you about that connection now, but I want to make the point that like a lot of the reporting in Ireland talks about Marc Godart as a single figure, but all of these investments and property operations were really talking about the Godart family. The whole thing was started by his dad, started by that guy René. He set up like 3 Luxembourg companies and he started investing in property in Luxembourg. He used to work for a rail company. And my understanding from speaking to locals is like they're like a farming family traditionally. That's where they would have come from. And then the wife is Denise Wester, or Denise Godart, as she's sometimes mentioned, sometimes using her maiden name, sometimes not. And she's named as like secretary or director on loads of these different companies. Like according to people who know the family, you know, she's kind of like a housewife person who leaves the business affairs to, you know, her husband and son, although, you know, she has legal obligations as a director, so she can't just claim to not know anything, if you know what I mean. Anyway, what it looks like to me when you look at the lands around their house is that they probably sold land and got money that way and started. So the origins of the wealth probably start with this Luxembourg housing and property boom, which is insane. Like I looked at the prices of land and like how much it had changed in Luxembourg in like a decade, and you could make a lot of money doing that. And especially if you then invested that money in Ireland, like your money would go a very long way, because I think it was 1 hectare in Luxembourg was worth about like 100,000 versus about 10,000 on average in Ireland. So it was like a big difference. The reality TV connection is that the Wester family have a man called Guy Wester, and he is famous. He's like he's a reality TV star. Like he has the level of fame of someone who was on a reality TV program in Luxembourg because he's a farmer. He was on Farmer Wants a Wife, which started in Germany. So I think it's Bauer sagt Frau, something like that is what it was called. He was on that and he actually found a wife. So he was the first person not to be German to be on that show. He was in it and he was a Luxembourger, and he actually found a wife and they have like 3 kids now. And the arrival of the kids was like reported in Luxembourg press because like he's a minor celebrity. He also became a local councillor, so he went into local politics as well. As far as I can establish, he is Marc Godart's cousin, so the nephew of Denise Wester, the mother.
Okay, right. And you say minor celebrity, but I mean, again, just for people who don't know this country, it's tiny. So, like,
People know,
you wouldn't need to be that famous for everyone really to know your name in a place this size, right? So it's like living in, I suppose, for most people, it'd be like living in a kind of medium-sized city, you know, where everyone kind of knows each other. If you went to school with, you know, their kids or whatever, you know, you have connections very easily. So this family, I suppose, even in terms of property, I suppose they were probably fairly well known around the area, if not more widely.
Yeah, they'd be fairly widely known.
Okay, so this family, who has a little bit of wealth already, they have their fairly young son. I think he was in his 20s, right, when he started this.
I think he was
we're around
18 when he got named
18.
as the
Wow.
first role, in one of the properties. So he was still a student, and he had all these roles on paper anyway in companies while he was doing his master and his PhD and so on.
Okay, and he starts buying property in Ireland after the crash. So could you kind of tell us like what would be the benefit, or what was the property market like in Ireland after the crash, because it's really unusual, that situation.
Yeah, well, it's Renee, right? It's the dad who starts doing it. So he leads the expansion, I suppose, from whatever property stuff they had going on in Luxembourg into Ireland in like 2012. So this is the perfect time to start buying Irish property. There'd been this massive property crash, and in coming from the global financial crisis of 2008, massive crash in 2009, and then in the subsequent years, the Irish properties values collapsed, and also people in Ireland could not buy them either, although they were cheap, because banks in Ireland were just not lending. So the banks were so much in debt that they were just not lending out mortgages. So people were kind of cut off from being able to buy. So it was described to me by one international investor who was around at that time as being like a gold rush. So all these international investors came from all over the place and were buying this stuff. And the Godarts were among them. So they actually got tipped off to this by an acquaintance who was Irish and knew that there were bargains to be had. And so they came to these mass auctions of Irish property. They were held in hotels. And it was all like distressed assets. So like people who had defaulted and stuff like that, or stuff that had been like repossessed. Or I don't know what, stuff to belonging to banks. Anyway, they had mass auctions where it was just like properties, like, I don't know, dozens of them being sold an hour, and picking up absolute bargains. Like people got stuff right in the city centre for like prices that would be unbelievable now, and that's where it started. So getting these properties and then converting them into flats and renting them out.
Okay, right. So they become, I suppose, these property moguls in Ireland.
Minor ones at first, yeah.
Minor ones at first, okay.
Yeah.
And Mark starts getting involved with this more and more seriously, and his name starts to appear with fair regularity in complaints and things that start to come
That's
out
right.
in these years.
So-
Can you explain that? Yeah.
Yeah, he had been a student. He did his PhD on actually something to do with finance and the housing market in a Dutch university. And then he got more and more involved with the like day-to-day handling of stuff in Ireland. So he would have been pretty young when he got into this. And according to the picture that's built up by tenants, by people who worked closely with this family, by people who worked with him, is that Mark, the son, is like a completely ruthless operator in all his dealings. He seems to be completely ruthless in pursuing the financial interests of his family. I was told that he's actually quite like parsimonious in the way that like he doesn't enjoy the fruits that much of what he's earning. Like when he is in Ireland, he often actually stays in the houses, or he used to in the past anyway. So stays in the houses that he himself rents out. So typically like a Godart structure is that you might have a couple of permanent tenants in a house and also have other rooms up on Airbnb. And he would appear himself in one of these Airbnb rooms, cooking in the kitchen, like where these other people are. So he doesn't come across as like a wealthy guy, or at least at that time he was not spending money. But like at the same time, he's bringing in enormous amounts. I mean, the director's fees that he was getting paid by one company at one time was in excess of 200,000 a year. And the revenues being earned by this property empire get like more and more like larger and larger. So the typical operation is they take a house. We can take one on Cork Street, for example. Okay, this is an address which has a really amazing history. It actually had a role in the 1916 Rising, because I think it was where the proclamation was printed. It's a really old house, one of the oldest houses on that street, and it has a really ornate stone doorway to kind of match. It was owned by a couple who did it up and made it into like a nice family home, and then it was bought, and it started to be rented out by Godart. And at one point, according to the internal records of the Godart operation that I got my hands on, it had 33 people living in it. So, or at least had 33 beds in these bunk bed type arrangements. So like triple stacked bunk beds, you know, multiple people to a room. It was described to me by one of the people working for the Godart operation as like one of the worst. So I spoke to a former tenant. They said they were sharing like one bathroom. And like they also weren't allowed to open the windows, and it led to issues like they couldn't get their clothes to dry because there was so much moisture in the house, you know, and they got in big trouble because someone like hung clothes outside the windows, and there was this big like rule from above that they weren't allowed to do stuff like that because they seemed not to want people to be drawn, or their attention to be drawn to this house at all and how many people were living in it. And, you know, I spoke to one person whose role was actually to go and collect the rent in cash from these people. So can you imagine that if there's like 33 people handing over hundreds of euro in cash every month, becomes quite interesting financially. And that's just one property.
Yeah, I mean, well, on the surface of it, as a lot of people would identify this as a slum.
Well, in Luxembourg press, he's been described as a slum landlord. I think in Ireland we have very strict libel laws, and we're very careful to stick to what's provable in documents and, you know, what people tell us. So we don't jump to using labels like that. But yeah, the Luxembourg press called him that. Okay,
right. And so this actually makes a lot of sense then, because 33 people with one toilet and you can't open the windows. You can just imagine, or 33 beds anyway. You can just imagine what it's like in there. But I found it interesting in your reporting how that coexisted with this incredibly hard line set of like tenancy rules, like not hanging your clothes out the window and things like that. You're suggesting that perhaps this might have been a way, all of these really nitpicking rules might have been a way to make sure that nobody ever noticed what was going on in the building.
Part of it was, according to the tenants I've spoken to, is they didn't want to draw attention to the properties and how many people were living there. It's interesting to look at the experience of a tenant. So my involvement on the story, it all started with trying to identify like the Godart corporate structure, right? And what did Luxembourg have to do with it? And then because I'd done that reporting, I started to make contacts with people who were close to the Godart operation, and kind of one thing led to another. And I ended up getting this really like internal view. I ended up getting my hands on large caches of internal company documents that kind of explained what exactly was going on, how like what properties were being let out. I had booking records, copies of contracts. I ended up getting actually lots of videos of evictions. They evict people, you know, fairly often, and when they did, they would video it. So what it all paints a picture of is an organization where Marc Godart decides the rules. Okay, he's in charge. He runs it over WhatsApp groups quite a lot of the time, with like instructing employees over voice notes, which we got our hands on. So we were able to kind of show him instructing people what to do. He, as well as owning properties and renting them out, he often does another thing, which is he works as an agent. So he lets things out on behalf of other people. So he doesn't own all the properties that he's renting out properties in. And he also rents properties himself as though he's the tenant, but then sublets them without the actual owner knowing. Okay, so he's done that a couple of times, and in the cases we've documented, he like subdivides the rooms, stacks them full of bunk beds. You know, the kind of the Godart modus operandi, like pack in as many people as possible. And the people he's targeting for this they're mostly not Irish. I was told by one employee that actually Irish people are not allowed to be tenants. He doesn't want them, neither Nigerians apparently, for some reason. He seems to prefer people in particular from Latin America. There's a large number of people who come to Ireland from Latin America to learn English. These are people who are allowed to work a limited amount of hours a week. I think it's maybe 20 hours. They're allowed to work part-time while studying English. There's like a special visa. they are people who, because they're there to learn English, probably don't have a great level of English, probably haven't heard about the reporting about this guy called Marc Godart, the landlord, probably don't know about Irish tenancy and housing laws. They're vulnerable to exploitation. Oh yeah, and they need cheap accommodation, right? They don't have that much money. So this is very much the target market for his like multi-level bunk bed operation. Those people, also people from elsewhere in the EU, like students and people working as waiters, that kind of thing, from Italy, Spain, often a lot of the time. And those people they often don't know who their landlord is. I've seen the receipts issued to people, and they say that sometimes they say Airbnb on them, even though obviously he's not Airbnb. Okay. I spoke to Airbnb, the actual company, about that, and they were like, it seems to be an illicit use of our logo, and they were going to look into it. Sometimes he uses a brand called Home Away, but he doesn't say like upfront, tries to avoid using the name Green Label anymore because it got too famous, and obviously tries to distance the name Godart from anything. The tenants have to sign contracts, but then they're not allowed a copy of the contracts, according to the tenants that I've spoken to. So they're not given a copy of it. It's like they're trying to avoid any record of anything taking place from being like provable. And I managed to get a copy of the contract, actually. It says stuff like you may shower for only 10 minutes and things like that. Like, it's really overweening. Or like you're not allowed to have overnight guests and stuff. Also it has language in it about CCTV. So this is like a recurring theme in the Godart property. This is a CCTV thing. From what I could establish, these paragraphs there about CCTV seem to have been copied and pasted from a completely irrelevant European Parliament document, which isn't to do with anything about having CCTV in residences. It's about something like, we're introducing CCTV into the hallways of the European Parliament. Anyway, it just looks like it's in like vaguely official looking language, okay, and refers to the Parliament, but it's copy and pasted into this document as though the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, has like authorized the use of CCTV in houses. And it refers to this EU regulation, which is completely irrelevant and is just to do with manufacturing standards for CCTV like systems. It's not to do with like privacy and the use of CCTV. So it's just masquerading as like legal language authorizing what he's doing. But this is kind of typical. The fact that you give someone a contract and you say in the contract, you have no. It says stuff like you have no rights under the Housing Act or something like this. That doesn't have any standing. Like, you can't just decree that Irish law doesn't apply because you get someone to sign a contract saying that it doesn't. It still applies anyway. Yeah. And it's exactly the same with employment contracts. Like, that's the other thing that I got a hold of was contracts that people who work for Godart sign. And it's the same. It decrees like Luxembourg law will apply here.
Wow.
And we know why he did that, because we have a voice note where Godart says, we want to change all the contracts to say that the company employing them is Itzig, which is one of the Luxembourg companies set up by his father, and not Green Label, because we want to avoid prosecution. He actually says that. Prosecution.
The reason is that we don't want to be exposed to any prosecution if we do not get along with an employee or a person that works for us. If we specify the Luxembourgish law applies and we pay from a Luxembourgish account.
In the Irish Times, we spoke to like a lawyer in Ireland, and it's like, it's not relevant if you signed a contract saying, oh, Luxembourg law applies. Like, it's not like a kingdom, where Marc Godart gets to just decree that this is the law and Irish law doesn't apply. Like, if it's a business operating in Ireland and employees in Ireland, like, Irish law still applies anyway. Yeah. But the people signing these contracts obviously may not know that. And they might not have the resources to understand it. That's the whole point.
That's it, right? Yeah, exactly. You're a student, right? You're showing up in a strange country, in a strange city. You don't really understand anything. And somebody who owns property and a legitimate rental business shows you a fairly legitimate looking contract with a lot of difficult to understand language. Why would you question it? Like, why would you think that they've actually just made up stuff and put it in there? I mean, it's not something that, might occur to you immediately. But yeah, this is like, I suppose, you and me signing a contract saying we don't have to pay for our supermarket stuff anymore. So we're just
exactly.
we're gonna walk out of Lidl with our shopping cart. Thanks very much. Sorry, it's in the contract that I signed.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just make believe that at this stage, you know, it just becomes a kind of list of wishes that he would like, but not and without any legal standing.
Yeah, in the kingdom of Godart, where Mark's word is law, which is what it's like working for him. The interesting thing is, right, so I said that like those typically like Spanish speaking students are like, that's a classic Marc Godart tenant and someone who he wants to live in his properties. It's also who works for him. So he also hires those people. Sometimes people who have been tenants. So for example, there's been cases where someone starts doing favors for Godart, kind of like because they're a tenant and maybe they owe him some money or something. Like he actually recruits people out of his properties. So he says like, oh, you find like you want to leave your accommodation and get your deposit. Okay, you find tenants to take over like the other properties of the house or something. And then it might be another favor. And anyway, they end up working for him that way. And it works because those people are very good at recruiting other people in that like in that
scene
community to fill those rooms because they speak the language. Like you'll see in Facebook groups online Spanish language ads directing people, like herding people towards what are Godart properties, but hidden under different names like roombookingsxl.com, which appears to have nothing to do with Godart, but it's actually Godart. And that like that's the system.
Yeah, and just maybe to reiterate in people's minds, if they haven't listened to our other episodes on the property issues in Dublin and Ireland more generally, these people, like everyone in Ireland right now, don't have the luxury of choice very often. There is a huge lack of housing in the country, massive. It's a crisis. It's, you know, it is a crisis. And the prices that people are paying for really substandard properties are astronomical at the moment. So it just doesn't, I suppose it wouldn't stand out so much being shown. For instance, I think one of the properties you talked about was part of a kitchen that had been segregated with a temporary wall. Was just big enough to put a bed in it. And outside the door of that fake little room was a CCTV camera looking down at the kitchen so that you would be filmed every time you left or entered this tiny bedroom. Like this is the kind of properties that we're talking about that wouldn't even stand out that much really in Ireland's property markets at the moment. Like, you know, people wouldn't... Yeah, go on, yeah.
That's the thing. So like the tenant, that is the case that actually won that award, right? That we was reporting about that particular case. The tenant who rented that room, his name is Salvador Chavez Morales. He's from Mexico. He's a computer engineer. And he was actually very happy to get it. Why? Because, oh yes, it is part of a kitchen that has like a false partition wall around it, and it has just a bed inside it with a little desk. But it was his own room. And that was different from a lot of the other rooms in the house which had like 4 or 6 people all sharing in bunk beds. So he considered himself very lucky. Also, it was very central. So he was delighted to get it, actually. Even though he was sharing with like a pack of people, you know, I don't remember how many, something like 12 or something, sharing one bathroom in the apartment that was on Capel Street. And I can probably tell like Salvador's stories. So he came to Ireland, you know, he'd actually saved for a good few years to do this transition. Dublin's this tech hub, right? He's a computer engineer. His plan was learn English, try and get ahead in his career. And he came, found a little bit of difficulty finding accommodation, but, you know, he found this room and he was initially very happy. And he started working as a waiter and started this English course. Things started to go south quite quickly because he did not like that CCTV camera. Because as you described him, there was a CCTV camera literally like just above the doorway of his room. Like he supplied us with photos and videos of it. And he just raised questions like, is this legal? He looked online and he found out, no, like according to privacy law, you can't like have something watching you, you know, inside your own house. So he questioned it, he queried it. And he got evicted because he objected to it. And this was like right after he'd moved in. So he showed us the text. He showed me the texts, and it was like let's say something like July 26th. He texted, all okay for August, you know, and the person who responded to him was like, yes, pay the rent, please, cash or card. And he's like, okay, I'll pay. And he pays the rent. And then like 5 or 6 days later, he got this eviction notice. He was told he needed to leave immediately within 7 days. He wasn't getting his rent back from August, which he just paid, just to remind, and he wasn't getting his deposit back. So he would be down like just over €1,000. He told me like that was his savings. That he like, it was everything he'd worked for. And now he was just facing being out on the street. He didn't have money without getting his deposit back to find a new place. So it was, you know, it was everything he had. So what he did was he was smart, and he was someone who wasn't going to give up easily and roll over. So he decided to fight it. He'd learned through the grapevine of other Mexican people in Ireland that this wasn't the only time this has happened. Actually, there had been another case of Mexicans living in a house who had CCTV in the house, and they had objected, and they had this big row with the landlord about it, but they'd won. So they'd won in this court called the RTB, the Residential Tenancies Board, which I mentioned, which is where tenants can take disputes with their landlord. And that's how he found out that his landlord was Marc Godart, because those people knew it was like Marc Godart. And yeah, he was able to figure out it was Godart as well. His receipts didn't say anything to do with Godart on them, but he was able to figure it out. So when he didn't leave, and like the company sent people to evict him forcibly, and he said, no, I'm not going anywhere. I know my rights. I've lodged a complaint with the Residential Tenancy Board, which means you can't evict me until the RTB has heard our case and decided. But that was completely ignored and brushed aside, and the video shows what happens next. That he took people sent by the company came in and dismantled his bed. So they took apart the bed, removed it, and they also removed the door from its frame. So the door of that fake little room inside a kitchen was taken off, but he still didn't leave. He was like, I'm staying here. So he actually slept on the floor with no door. I think with no lights either. I think somehow they managed to take away the electricity connection for as long as he could bear it, essentially, while he looked for something else. And, you know, he described it to me as being extremely stressful. All of his possessions in the world, including his laptop, which is crucial, you know, he's a computer engineer, were in that room, and he was worried that without a door, they could get taken by somebody. He missed loads of class, like English class, because of that, because he was so worried. He started running out of food. He was worried about leaving the flat in case they changed the locks, and then he wouldn't get his stuff back. Like all this kind of stuff was very stressful. Anyway, he stuck it out for like a few more weeks and then managed to find somewhere else. But he kept like lobbying for his deposit back, and he didn't get it. And yeah, his case went to the RTB. So that was the story that I was. That ended up winning. We were able to tell it because we got a whistleblower inside the Godart operation who knew about this case from the inside, and he was able to say, yeah, that guy was evicted because he objected to CCTV. Our guys went round and they took away his bed and his door. Like, he confirmed, like, detail by detail, everything that Salvador said was the case. And the whistleblower had been like personally very troubled by what had happened, which is part of the reason why he decided to speak to us.
Is this where you got access to the actual video footage from the CCTV?
We managed to obtain, actual imagery of that taken by that CCTV in the house. I mean, following on from this, I got access to like large amounts of documents from inside the organization. And we've got CCTV taken within different properties. I think maybe 3 different properties. The way that it works is that the Godart operation has CCTV very commonly in different properties, and employees are assigned to monitor it. So it's part of their job to monitor the CCTV. Oh. And we know about this because there was a huge fuss over, for example, Dublin City Council workers gaining access to a property. They were checking a property in central Dublin because they were concerned about fire safety. A series of Godart properties got fire safety notices. One of them, Capel Street, by the way, that little room in a kitchen that was ordered to be removed because it wasn't fire safe. Anyway, Dublin City Council went into a property, and they were allowed access in by someone. an employee, and then spoke to a cleaner in the property, and the cleaner put them onto the phone of her manager and stuff. Anyway, you can see over the CCTV these guys with clipboards like measuring walls and stuff. And there was this huge fuss because Godart did not want the council coming in, and he blamed the employees and said they shouldn't have let them in, even though they have like a legal right to go in according to the council. And he fired the cleaner over that, as well as the manager who she spoke to over the phone, which caused a lot of bad feeling among employees because, they were kind of doing what authorities said, But it's... my colleague Colm Keena also reported another case where the Godart operation, because it's typically his company or some company structure that's doing the letting, but like he's in charge of all of this. He was letting out a load of little rooms, I think it's on Westmoreland Street, to beauticians, and they had CCTV cameras, and the CCTV cameras were watched to see how many clients went in and out of the beauticians. And then the contracts that they signed were they had to pay rent, but they also had to pay a commission per client.
Stop.
Something around €10. And, they had to report, I had like 5 clients or 8 clients, like pay accordingly. And they would be checked against the CCTV. It's very...
This is
creative.
wild.
I mean, I'll give it that.
I mean, it is creative. It almost seems, when you think about this person moving into his own flats and trying to even make money that way, it almost seems like a kind of obsession with how far can I take this? Like how much little money can I squeeze out of every activity that I have under my watch? Yeah, it almost seems kind of like a hobby almost rather than a business model.
Wait till you hear, Tim. I mean, I have a copy of the employment contract that he signs, or he gets people to sign. And it lays out fines and deductions that people face in like granular detail. Okay, so first of all, it decrees that they are not employees, they're contract workers, which a court in Ireland, according to a barrister we spoke to, like if it quacks like an employee and it walks like an employee, it's an employee no matter what your contract says. But anyway, the fines and infractions, I have a list of them here. Okay. €5 deduction from pay if a worker is 10 minutes late to a team call. €10 if they're 20 minutes late. €5 for not sending a daily list of activities over WhatsApp. €10 for not sending a daily voice note, reading their due diligence report over WhatsApp. Between €3 and €6 for not updating an Excel spreadsheet. €1 from each day that workers fail to fill out their availability in a calendar. It's just like loads of stuff. And this is all, we know this is imposed because I have voice notes and copies of like group chats where Godart is ordering people to be deducted for this and that and the other. So in that case about the people getting fired, for example, for letting in Dublin City Council workers who were investigating fire safety, he ordered that the cleaner not be paid for the last month. Okay, so to be let go without being paid salary, the manager as well. And also, I think someone else involved with it was also deducted €100 for that.
He gave the order to open the door to let them in. So it's on him. He has to be fired immediately, removed everywhere, pay with health, and full registry of fines applied. The cleaner, on the other hand, did what he said. So I think this cleaner should be fired as well to send the right signal. I want those people removed. They cause damage. We cause damage to them. It is quid pro quo.
The contract also just states, if you have unsatisfactory performance, we can deduct. So anyway, yeah, he reserves the right to just dock people's pay for all kinds of things.
According to him, is this at all legal in Irish labour law?
I have no idea.
Wow, right.
I have no idea. It's par for the course in Godart land anyway.
Right, yeah. I mean, like this kind of brings up in general what seems to be a presence in all of this, which is the failure of the real authorities to really do anything about this. I mean, as I understand, so there's CCTV in a private residence is not legal, right? Having people watching you in your...
It kind of depends, but yeah, I mean, we asked the data commission about it, and they were like, it raises serious questions. But yeah, it's very, very questionable. In some cases, like let's imagine a student residence, you could have CCTV, say in the stairwell and stuff, or like looking at the door. So there are some cases where you can have CCTV, but you can't invade people's privacy. So yeah, it depends a bit, but like in the footage that we have, it's recording audio. We have a footage of two people in their kitchen. You can hear them talking to each other, and it's recording these two people in the kitchen. Like one gives another a hug and stuff. And the reason why this was being used was it was sent among employees because they were trying to identify what tenant left dishes in the sink. Okay, so it records an interaction between two people, and the guy's washing up, he gets distracted, ended up walking away and leaving dishes in the sink, okay? According to the data commissioners that I asked for, you have to have a really good justification, like safety and stuff, to have CCTV. And dishes in the sink would probably not fall under the required justification for having CCTV watching and recording audio as well.
I should hope not. Like, I should hope not. I mean, yeah, it is one thing to have CCTV in a stairwell. It's another thing to have CCTV in your kitchen. And yet it's another thing, like, to have CCTV in your kitchen recording in case of a break-in or something. But having CCTV in your kitchen where there's actual human beings sitting in a room and watching you and going over the stuff that happens in that kitchen, I mean, that's a whole other level again, right?
It's not just sitting in the room, right? Because they actually had it, you could watch it over an app on people's mobile phones. So they could just check in on you whenever, you know, which is really quite creepy. The Godart employees.
I mean, it makes it all the more absurd to have the situation where you have Dublin City Council employees coming in and being filmed on CCTV, I presume without their knowledge, or I don't know. I guess, yeah, since, like, you know, it seems to be dubious whether it's legal. They might have taken note of that. And then having that CCTV filming them being used as a way to tell people not to let them in to the property, which is their legal right, and then being used to fire other people. But I mean, more than this, more seriously than this, having Salvador lying on the floor of his bedroom without electricity, which he had a legal right to, and which he had lodged a case with the RTB, like you said, that nobody had the right to kick him out of that flat. And yet he was abandoned, basically. But, you know, how was it allowed that private goons, were allowed to be sent in to take the door off his flat when they had no legal right to? I mean, that's a failure, surely, of the Irish authorities in a massive way. All of this is, surely. That's
the question that kept returning to us. Like, where is the enforcement? Like, how is that this person is able to continue doing this? Because it's been going on for years and continue to operate like this. So it's like different points of failure. So you can see, for example, in the fact that the Dublin City Council sent people over to check fire safety, that there are efforts going on, you know, to enforce. There are different institutions and authorities that are like in charge of different bits. One major point of failure seems to be that the Residential Tenancies Board, which hears the disputes between tenants and landlords and has just heard one Godart case after another, there seems to be an enforcement power lacking for when tenants win. So tenants get awarded this sum or that sum. But if you are a shameless person, you simply do not pay it. And then the tenant has to shell out on getting a lawyer to take you to like a higher court to try and put in an enforcement order. And then you can find that you're trying to enforce a payment order against one company, but it turns out that that company is shut down, or you're actually dealing with a different company, because there's a whole corporate web of different companies here that we're talking about, with like one being hired by the other, renting another, the assets are owned by one, but the renting is done by another. It's all Godart, like Godart directors and secretaries all over the place, but it's confusing enough that it's really difficult to pin down. And we've had cases in the court where Godart has argued that he has no revenue at all in this particular company. There's no money to pay out, so they don't have any money. It's all gone. He argued in court, for example, that he is bound under like the requirements of the company to pay all revenues back to Luxembourg. So going back to those companies that we saw on the letterbox outside that red big family home, Hesper and Siren and Itzig, that all this money is going back to there, and so he doesn't have any left to like give out. Never mind that like that's literally like his family home where they're going. Anyway, that he really puts a lot of effort into making things very complicated and difficult to figure out. Another thing that came up actually in the files was he realized that having Godart names and addresses all over company house records was making it possible for journalists to track like who owned stuff and what was going on a bit, and like linking it back to him. So what he did was he told employees to put up an ad on Indeed, you know, the job site, to find someone who would be willing to act as a director. So this person didn't have any job really except handing over their passport. And then they would be put down as the director of a company in the records. You can only interpret that as because he just wanted someone else's name there rather than his own. And then they just get like paid a fee for that. And the job ad states, or the contract states, that they'd get another fee if they were required to come to Ireland for some kind of formality. Okay, so also I was told by former employees that he does that with employees too. So he got employees to use their IDs to be directors and stuff, and like open bank accounts and this kind of thing, even though, you know, the owners of this, you know, the ultimate owners are the Godarts. You know, there isn't really any doubt about that. And it's quite prevalent as well. Like he got another employee to start opening Airbnb accounts, on like to pay people fees to use their passports to open Airbnb accounts, because they were getting really bad reviews and they kind of wanted a fresh slate.
Wow.
But you know, the Airbnb accounts would just be renting out like it's still part of the Godart stuff, it's just hiding. There's all kinds of stuff there. He actually employs a fair number of people like overseas. So like randomly he's got like people in Nigeria and Mexico and places like that dealing with communications with tenants. So if tenants have an issue, they're actually like asking questions of someone who's in like, say, Nigeria or Morocco or something like that. Or also working on stuff like accounting or like drawing up documents, this kind of thing. But they ran into an issue of trying to pay those people, because my understanding was like Western Union was asking questions and was like, you know, you have to pay like, there's taxes and stuff. Like if you've got employees, you're supposed to pay like national insurance and things. So, you know, Western Union isn't supposed to be used to like send salary to people abroad if they're employees. So like it was both expensive and like questions were being asked. So according to the chats, like the WhatsApp group chats I had, the solution that Godart suggests is opening bank accounts on behalf of those employees overseas as though they lived in Ireland. There's a reference to generating proof of address. Don't know what that means. Which would like show that they lived at a Godart property, and then the idea was that they would open Revolut accounts for them and like pay them that way. Or another way that they used to pay people. To be clear,
you mean things like electricity bills or phone bills?
Yeah, the kind of thing you need to open a bank account. So
there's a reference that if you live in Morocco, let's say, but we want you to have an Irish bank account that we can generate. Is that the word that they used?
Generate is the word that they use. Yeah.
One of those. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's just very casually stated in a group chat. Another way that they have of paying people as well, according to former employees, is so it's strange. You get paid, say, 200 to your Revolut, but your job is to pass on 150 to the cleaner, and you just get to keep 50 of it or something. So it's a really atypical way of paying people. So if it was all to be looked into, it would just look like this particular person just paid this other person 150, and it wouldn't be clear that that cleaner was being employed by like Green Label Investments or whoever it happens to be.
Okay. Two questions.
Yeah.
First of all, do we have an idea of how big of an operation this is? Like, how many properties are we talking about? How many people are involved here?
Oh yeah, there was a a discussion on a group chat about it. I think this was in 2023, and there was a reference to 37 people working for the Godart operation now. So that's pretty substantial for an Irish property business. So we got a kind of snapshot of the scale of it from 2023 from internal booking records, and it showed there were 208 bed places. So these are like, either bunks or beds, and those were across 19 different flats and houses in Dublin city centre, including that was 33 in a single property, which was that Cork Street property I mentioned. But that is partial, so that might be purely the Dublin residential sector. There's also a lot of commercial properties that Godart has gotten into, and we know that he also has interest in Tipperary, for example, in Borris O'Kane. He's renting out stuff there. If you look online as well, like there's Godart company records in the UK and Malta as well. So I think it seems to be a car park in the UK, and I don't know what it is in Malta. I know he did want to expand internationally, maybe to Singapore. So we don't really know how big it is. We just kind of get glimpses. The other thing is that, like, according to my reporting, how I mentioned he was trying to recruit people to become directors in name for companies. Like, he set up companies to do that. They were called Valendale and Shinetop. And it seems to be that they were kind of used as the vehicle to manage a property interest that was on Suffolk Street in Dublin. So when you're talking about all these different companies supposedly owned by different people or run by different people, it becomes a little bit difficult to pin down exactly how big it is.
Okay, all right. So yeah, just like everything else, I suppose, just very opaque in general.
Deliberately complex and opaque, I would say.
Yeah. And then speaking of this complexity, so like you explained very well how this complexity has made it really difficult for anyone to pinpoint Godart for this, or to make him pay for it, or to take responsibility for it. I suppose there's other things that you could think of doing, like a house with 33 beds and one toilet. I mean, surely places like this should be shut down as insalubrious, right? I mean, that these aren't fit habitation spaces to be rented out legally. Things like that. Like, what is being done? What can we concretely say that the Irish authorities have done about this situation, far beyond the financial parts, but the living conditions of the people who are being put in these situations? So
we have the fire enforcement notices. So fire safety enforcement notices by Dublin City Council have required Godart to change things inside the property, including, I think, removing that little room where Salvador had been. Also, I think they weren't allowed to have, there were lots of internal locks which operated by codes, PIN codes. And I think something like they have to be keys or something like that, because in the fire with the electricity and stuff, that can malfunction. So he's been ordered to make changes like that. And my colleague, Colm Keena, has called back to these properties. And I think in some cases he's seen that works were being done. Then the other thing is that he's being pursued by through the courts. A lot of those cases it's been tenants, very dedicated tenants, who have been pursuing them. So for example, there's one case which it's been two cases, I think, where tenants have just been very, very determined to get him to actually pay the money that he was ordered to pay by the Residential Tenancies Board. This has turned into quite protracted legal fights, and it's just kind of due to the determination of the tenants just to keep going until he's paid. So he was ordered to pay tenants money by courts. There's a few different things going through the courts right now. So for example, just this January, he actually finally did pay out €10,000 and costs of just under 2,500 to be shared between 3 former tenants. Those were tenants actually who were evicted from Reuben House. So that was the one where the tenants were evicted and saw their homes going up on Airbnb. That was an illegal eviction, and they finally got paid in January, but they actually got evicted in April 2022. We have a video of that, because some of the records inside the company were actually records of evictions they'd undertaken. And so there was a video of them evicting these tenants. So you see Francesca Ghibellini, that tenant, for example, you see her saying, this is an illegal eviction, literally standing outside her house, being like, what are you doing? You can't evict us.
This is an illegal eviction. I know what I'm saying, and I know what I'm talking about. Because I'm going to call the guard.
Call the guard. Guarda dopo.
Sure.
Call it.
I call it. Hello? Yeah, hi. My name is Francesca Ghibellini. I need the guard here because the landlord has decided to illegally evict us. They moved our stuff without consent. They entered the apartment without consent. We opened the claim to the RTP. We are legally allowed to stay in the property. They know, they have been told, and they are doing what they want. So they have moved my property without my permission.
And what happened in that case was the locks had just been changed while they were at work. So you can see the people who've been sent by the Godart operation are waiting in a car or a van, and then the tenants start coming and they can't get into their property. And so then they come out and they explain like they've been evicted and that their stuff has all been taken out.
So where are my belongings?
The storage, Nesta.
Storage where?
Nesta.
Nesta where?
I give you the location.
And then they're told you can go and collect your stuff from a storage facility on the other side of the town. So like these tenants like came home, and this is an illegal eviction. This has been established by the Irish courts now, and Godart has actually had to pay out because of it. They came home, their stuff had been removed and the locks had been changed and it had been put in a storage facility. So they're just like instantly homeless with their stuff in a storage facility. Can you imagine?
No, I mean, like, this is 19th century stuff. Like, this is stuff that really has, shouldn't be happening since, like, regular people got the right to vote in the 1920s. Like, no, seriously, this is actually really shocking. Even the removal of the door from the bedroom of Salvador, reminded me immediately of eviction of peasants during the famine. Like, that's literally what they did that's what landlords did to peasants during the famine. They took off their door, right? So that they couldn't squat back in the cottages. Like, it was literally making the place uninhabitable. And the next stage, like they did to Salvador, the next stage was to burn down the thatched roof, just to turn this place into an uninhabitable place. It's effectively what they did to Salvador. Took away his bed, took away his door, took away the electricity. And this same thing, the idea of coming home after work and putting your key in the door and seeing it's a different lock and having no recourse, saying that somebody has taken your stuff and put it in a storage facility. This really, to me, what it underlines the most is severe lack of responsibility of tenant protection in the Irish state. Like, this shouldn't even be anywhere close to possible. Like, this shouldn't be tolerated even for a moment. And the idea that it took a while for people to say, this is an illegal eviction. Yeah, we have decided through the courts, this isn't illegal. That's too late. That is way too late. The action needs to be it needs to be taken before anyone even gets near changing the locks in the door, let alone in the seconds afterwards. Nobody should ever feel in the position that they have in any ways a legal right to do that, which is the case in a lot of Europe, right? Like, tenant rights in a lot of mainland Europe are a lot stronger than tenant rights in Ireland. But I'm shocked and disappointed, really, in the state's role in this and not protecting tenants more, or even at a basic level, it seems.
I know Salvador, an early step that he took was to go to the guards, because according to him, like, his money was being taken from him, because he'd given this deposit, he'd just paid his rent, and now they were kicking him out, and they wouldn't give him his money back. So, he went to the guards and was like, my money's being taken, but the guards, according to him anyway, they were like, no, like, that's really not our area. Like, we're not getting involved in, like, house stuff, stuff with your landlord. He ended up getting helped, I think, by a housing charity called Threshold, who advised him and, like, explained how to go down the route of the RTB, the Residential Tenancies Board. And he was represented there with an interpreter. Like, it kind of shows, like, I don't know, you'd need to be someone with a lot of perseverance. And the energy that you need to like pursue this stuff as well. Like, how many people do you think have just kind of let it go because it's a painful experience, but they kind of cut their losses and move on, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, just...
And like the meanness of it, you know, like keeping these little deposits from all these people. It seems to happen just again and again and again. I don't know how many tenants I've talked to. Just seems, the picture it paints is that it happened routinely people's deposits were taken. And so you're keeping, like in the case of Salvador, I think his deposit was €490. You're keeping €490 from a waiter, you know, a waiter who's studying English, a little sum of money that to someone who's being paid a director's fee in 6 figures, it doesn't mean anything to you. But to a waiter who's studying English, that's his savings that he's saved up for years in Mexico, working to come to Ireland and to try and like make himself a better life. And that is everything he has. That's what he needs to have a roof over his head. And it's been taken from him. Well, you know,
that's it, yeah.
For no reason. And like, it's so mean. It's so mean to do that. Like, it's so, like, can you imagine, like, how greedy do you need to be to take all those little bits of money from those people when it doesn't mean anything to you?
Yeah, that's it, right? I mean, and it's not only taking 450 quid from a waiter who needs it, but a waiter that you've just made homeless. Like, you've just kicked this person out in the street, effectively. And when you say, like, I mean, imagine how many people don't follow up on this. Of course they don't, because where are they even going to do it from? Unless you, like, happen to have friends or somewhere where you can stay the night while the RTB is looking at your case, then you're just going to have to, I don't know, get a plane ticket out of there. Like, what do you do? Like, where do you even sleep while the RTB is taking its sweet little time protecting your basic rights? Like, I mean, this is just, it's really shocking. I mean, the 450 quid being taken from somebody who desperately needs it when, like, you desperately don't need it is very similar to the €3 taken from your employees because they didn't look at an Excel sheet in the time that you wanted them to. I mean, it's very Scrooge, right? It's obsessive. It seems obsessive. You know, it gives the image of somebody who sleeps in their money, right? Who likes the smell of money and kind of like likes rubbing it on themselves. Like it's macabre almost. Like it's because, but like you say, like it's not about the actual money. That's not business. You know, that's not like being a good business person.
Like there is a point at which being so hardline on small amounts of money becomes counterproductive, right? Because you end up having problems with tenants. You have angry people pursuing you through the courts. You have angry employees. Employees do not like being docked pay. Of course, they're going to have like a different perspective on like whether their work was good enough. Like arbitrary docking of pay was a massive problem in terms of losing staff in his organization.
The man himself is actually fairly absent from this story so far. So did you manage to talk to him, or has he been contacted by any journalists? And if so, what has he said about all this?
Yeah, of course, he has a different perspective on all of this. So obviously for every article that we've written, we contacted him, and I put like all of what we were going to put in the articles to him in detail, followed up many times, you know, trying to get responses from him. He's not particularly forthcoming with responses. He has written back to me a couple of times, and I managed to get him on the phone once and put questions to him, but he just told me to write them in an email essentially. So he tends not to engage too much in the detail. One thing he did dispute was he said in that Cork Street property that there were 2 toilets, not 1. Okay. The tenants say 1, he says 2. That was one thing. And then the last time I heard from him was before we put out our last big investigation. And we put all these questions to him, and he was really annoyed. Basically, he doesn't like our reporting. I mean, it's understandable. And he wrote to me, it is okay to report on facts in an unbiased way. There is no need to manufacture videos with my voice, or indeed to publish 20 articles with more or less the same topic. My person, it's become obvious that your motivation is not objective reporting. It's clear whose interests you represent and why you spend so much time recycling materials brought to you. It appears to be a manhunt, and the goal is harm to my person, reputation, business, and credibility. I pointed this out to you already, but my opinion seems irrelevant to you. Please stop biased reporting. If any disgruntled tenants, guests, or employees want to challenge our decisions, the courts are there for them, and they can be heard in first and second instances if they so wish. I am strongly against condemnation by the media. So yeah, he said a couple of times that, you know, these disputes are coming out of disgruntled tenants and so on, or disgruntled employees, that kind of thing. So he does have a different point of view, and he stands by everything, you know.
Right. Yeah. And from that line he's taking, then, like, do you know what he's trying to suggest? Like, what would be the ulterior agenda behind
Our
this?
agendas.
Is he?
I
Yeah.
don't know what he's talking about there. Maybe he thinks
Right.
we're like biased. I don't know what he thinks, but like something of it was suggested in the internal messages in his company. So I'm going to pull up what he said because this is actually kind of funny. So there was a group chat between different employees, and they were dealing with the fact that an accountant quit. Okay, so an accountant that had been working for him quit because she was concerned. She wrote that, like, she started writing that, you know, how might a judge see this? I'll bring up some of the messages here. Yeah, so this particular accountant, she wrote, "I'm not good at lying. It's difficult for me to deal with those hiding things," all right? And it was to do with having to open a bank account from this Shine Top Limited, which was one of these companies opened through identities of other people's, and also a third company. And she wrote, "I won't do that," because she feared, quote, "the judge will only blame the accountant. I could be the one who gets blamed." And she was warning that, you know, the AIB, the bank, had refused to open a new bank account, and she thought that there was something wrong. So when there was discussion of this later, Godart said it was better to hire people based outside of Ireland. Okay, so this is what he wrote, quote, "My feeling is that if people do this kind of dirty work is in single quotations, it is better to hire from abroad so they do not get into contact with local leftist views." This is what Godart wrote. And then he continued, he said, "They will think less about local opinion of small Ireland." So I don't know, I guess maybe he thinks it's leftist views or something like that.
Well, like tenants' rights and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, mad radical stuff.
Madness, yeah. Maybe, I mean, I think it's also worth like pointing out as well that, like, we've repeatedly asked him to just do like a full interview with us where he could answer all of this and explain his point of view and everything. You know, he doesn't agree to doing that. And in lieu of that, like, I have represented as much as I can through the things that he himself has written and said. Okay, so we have quite a lot of like his messages, his voice, stuff like that. So a lot of this isn't like, it's not stuff that we're claiming, but it's something that like he said himself. For example, when he was talking about why doesn't he not want to use the name Green Label anymore, he wrote, "We want to keep properties apart because I knew about the angry tenants and the risk of articles against me." And then he said, "Setting up a new property with my name in news would have been unwise. Best for my name or Green Label not to appear during this time." So, you know, we're working from stuff that he himself said and wrote.
Okay, listen, so we've seen a lot already on this subject, and it's fairly confusing, but I think you've laid it out pretty well. Naomi, is there anything else that you think is important for people to know about this case from everything that you've looked at so far?
I have two things I want to say. The first one is reporting this whole story drove home to me the importance of speaking multiple languages, because an enormous part of why I was, or how I was able to find tenants, find former employees, kind of really go into this whole world, was by speaking other languages than English. Like, a lot of this reporting was done in Spanish, some of it was done in Italian, and it was that which really opened doors for people, which kind of built trust. And I think that that's really important. I think that in Ireland we assume that all the stories that there are going to be English language stories or Irish language stories, but actually we have these whole communities where, you know, stuff is going on in a different language. And in this case, you know, a lot of it was a closed circuit, kind of mostly Spanish speaking world. Like, the ads were done through Spanish. I've listened to a recording of a tenant interview, like when they were getting the house, entirely through Spanish. Everyone who was involved in letting it out, the whole thing was being done through Spanish. And, you know, a lot of the tenants involved didn't have the English language skills yet. to reach beyond and to get the kind of resources like that they needed when they needed help and so on. So that was one thing that kind of stood out to me during this reporting, was like how useful it was to be able to speak more than one language and to report in more than one language. So I think that's kind of, I feel it's important to point that out at a time when a lot of funding for learning multiple languages at school and stuff is being cut, and people assume that you can replace this stuff with like automatic translation. That really helps, but it doesn't help with building trust with people who don't necessarily speak English. So that's one thing. And the second thing, I just want to maybe point our listeners to the work that have been done by my colleagues on this. So particularly two colleagues who I worked with closely on this work are Colm Kenna and Enda O'Dowd. So Colm really, he's really good at digging into like corporate records of companies and stuff, and he helped to really track what was going on with this really confusing constellation of different corporations and like registered companies and so on. And he's been quite closely following the court cases to do with Godart. And Enda O'Dowd is a video reporter, and he made really amazing videos where we were able to show some of the footage of evictions and stuff that we'd found. So that was amazing. And we also did like a series of podcasts on it too with the In the News podcast team as well at the Irish Times. So there's like loads of different people who've been working on this story as well as me, and it was myself, Colm and Enda, we were jointly awarded the Mary Raftery Prize specifically for our work on that, the story, the big investigation to do with Salvador and the use of CCTV in properties. So yeah, just wanted to point that out.
Absolutely, congratulations to all of them, and congratulations to you, Naomi, for winning this prize, which is very well deserved on a very worthy subject. And we'll put up some links to those articles in the show notes in case you want to read them for yourselves, listeners. But for the time being, I think that's all from me.
Brilliant. If you are not a supporter on Patreon yet, go over to patreon.com/The Irish Passport now.
Yes, exactly. So you can sign up today at www.patreon.com/The Irish Passport, and you will be supporting the continued making of the podcast in the future. All right, slán everyone.
Slán.